I'm just switching to the chair's notes, which I'm not as prepared for as I would like. So we're going to be looking at the UK-India Free Trade Agreement today. Negotiations were launched on the 13th of January this year. We have been told that both countries are going to leave aside sensitive areas, although we don't have a great deal of clarity as to what that means. But the UK has been very clear that it wants to include comprehensive access for UK agricultural goods to the Indian market, which we know is sensitive, that the UK wants to explore patent provisions which will achieve what they're referring to as an effective balance between rewarding research and innovation whilst ensuring access to medicines. And we know, for those of you who followed the EU-India negotiations, you know that that's far from controversial, far from being uncontroversial. The UK also is pushing the digital chapters within all of its free trade agreements, and India is going to be no exception. So we'll be looking today at what the impacts of the trade deal are going to be for people in India and the UK, effects on farming and farm employment in both countries, but especially in India, where 42% of workers work in agriculture. That compares with just 1% of the UK population. We'll be looking at how this trade deal could affect India's production of affordable generic medicines. India is the world's largest producer of generic medicines, ensuring that prices are kept low for many developing countries around the world. We'll also be looking at the impact for digital rights in both countries. And we're joined by a panel of experts who I'm very pleased to be able to welcome to the session, who are going to help us explore some of those questions. Speakers are going to have 10 minutes each, and I'll be trying to keep them to time, but we should have plenty of time for questions afterwards. So I'm going to start with Ranja Sengupta, who's joining us from Third World Network, head of Third World Network India. She has spent many years analysing WTO, regional and bilateral trade policy developments, exploring the potential impacts for global social and gender justice. She's a member of the steering committee of the Gender and Trade Coalition, which I know some of the organisations we work with in the UK are involved with. And this looks at a progressive feminist trade agenda that opposes neoliberal co-option of women's rights as a means to expand the unjust trade system. Ranja, over to you.
Thanks, Ruth. Let me first of all say that it's a great pleasure to join this event and speak to, I guess mainly civil society organizations and activists and like-minded allies in the UK and in India. This is an FTA which has been, it's been recently launched and we knew about it for some time, but I must say, I think we are all probably still grappling with what it exactly means, because UK was part of the EU, a lot of the trade data, and we have I'm speaking as an Indian, so India has negotiated the EU-India Free Trade Agreement for quite a long time. Can you hear me?
Yes, apologies. I think we just had a little glitch. Carry on.
Okay, I was worried it's coming from mine. So yeah, so we've been kind of struggling with the EU-India FTA since 2007, but that kind of went on, it kind of was put on hold for some time, but that's also waking up. But we had not looked at UK as a separate entity because it was part of the EU before. So now with the launch of this FTA, we are actually really beginning to learn, I think, more about UK-India trade and trade policy. So let me speak. I want to just touch on a few key points, Ruth, and as you said, I think my main focus will be on agriculture and dairy, which, as you said, are very, very sensitive issues because of the huge number of people that are dependent on these sectors, both for food security and livelihoods. And you said that both sides said that they'll stay off sensitive topics, which means in the first place, they should be staying off agriculture and dairy, but obviously they won't. We had seen the same interest even from the European Union in, of course, India's agriculture and dairy markets, and UK will be no different. Somehow, we tend, at least I have tended to think of UK as this, big financial services oriented economy, I mean, more advanced and not so much into agriculture. But then I was really surprised to learn that it has major interest actually in agriculture exports, though I mean, I think the volumes and values are still not that high. But I mean, it exports whiskey, lamb, poultry, cheese, vegetables, rice, tea, etc. So UK says it's interested in food and drink, right? So I think beverages also is one of main export interests for the UK. And for us, so to look at it, I mean, we have like a budding wine industry. So and India has very high tariffs in that sector, like 150% import duty at the moment. So I'm sure that, you know, and it's same on whiskey. So UK will definitely target that. While this may not be a major, you know, huge employment issue, because it's not that small producers produce wine, but the fact is that this sector marks one of the, you know, the high value added agro processing sector in India. So in that way, it really kind of is one of the key sectors for agriculture growth in India. And I'm sure India will, I mean, UK probably will face some opposition there, because this was a major issue, these wine tariffs, even for the EU-India FTA. But India has, you know, India, as we said, agriculture is a sensitive issue. So India's applied tariffs are pretty high in many of these products, and also in dairy. So we know that UK has key interest in many of those sectors: wheat and meat, fish, and poultry, and which are all pretty sensitive sectors in India. And as I said, beverages and wine. One issue is that the subsidies issue. I mean, because we know we are fighting this out in the WTO, and we've seen that like the developed countries, including the European Union and US, have maintained very high subsidies. When you compare UK subsidies with India's, I mean, in absolute number, India's is much higher, right? India gives about 43.6 billion US dollars, which is its amber box support plus green box support. Whereas UK gives, I think, about 3 to 3.5 billion dollar. That's pounds actually. So it comes to around 4.5 billion US dollars. This is 2018. But, you know, I was quickly trying to look at what does it mean per farm. Like if you, because we have huge, I mean, million times, I mean, we have many times more the number of farms in India compared to UK. So when you actually do, you know, when you calculate domestic support per farm holding, I'm giving 2018 data, then the UK's subsidy per farm is 36,790 US dollars. In pound terms, it's 28,300. And compared to that, India's is 230 USD per farm. So you can imagine kind of what's the huge difference. But as you all know, in free trade agreements, we do not negotiate subsidies because it's a multilateral issue. It's negotiated in the WTO. So India probably could be, you know, lowering its tariffs, which is its main instrument to protect its agriculture sector and farmers. So India could be asked by the UK to really lower and remove applied duties on many of these agricultural products, whereas UK one is actually a much higher subsidizer when you look at it on a per farm or even on the basis of operational area. And also UK has very like high standards of non-tariff measures, right? Like food standards. So we know that for one, this seems to be one of India's major hopes, right? That they will address these agriculture and food standards through the FTA. So it wants UK to lower non-tariff barriers in food standards and also in manufacturing products actually. But but that would first mean that even within India, across the states and even across the UK, the standards have to be harmonized. And then frankly, I don't think a lot of these food standards themselves will be lowered, but what could be eased is what they look at is the technical barriers like certification and so on. But frankly, India hadn't made much headway even in the EU-India FTA, and I'm not very sure that they can make much headway in this. And in that case, India could, end up, lowering its tariffs, that is removing all its protection almost, whereas it will still face on a comparative basis a highly subsidized agricultural products from the UK, and it could be actually not able to access UK markets because of the standard barriers, which would still remain a problem. And as you know, quickly, let me just talk about dairy. Again, we have very small holder dairy farming here, and we have higher import duties on skim milk powder, baby milk powder, whey, butter, and also processed products like cheese, etc., to protect the dairy sector. And the dairy sector for us is again, it's a budding food processing industry. Like, it is actually just beginning to take off, the processing parts and more high value added dairy products. So that will face a challenge from UK dairy products like cheese and so on. But also, I think milk powder and maybe, other processed dairy products. And the other thing is, of course, this small milk producers' livelihoods, because, for us, it's a very pyramidical structure. So the processing industry is small at the moment. Its production is low, and therefore, what is always said is that, how much will be displaced. It's already such a small industry. But the fact is, whatever is the process production is dependent on milk supply by millions of small, very small milk producers. Many of them are women. Maybe they just own one cow. And India is based on this cooperative system. So the cooperatives actually pass on a share of their profits to these very small holders. Amul has been a huge success. A lot of they like, the stakeholders are the milk producers. They own the cooperative, and the profit is distributed among them. When that is replaced by very corporate agri-biz produced products from countries such as the UK, this means it's not only that they are displacing this processed food sector, they're actually, this will have a ripple down effect down to the bottom to the smallest milk producers. So that's a major, major worry. And India, this was one of the reasons why both agriculture and dairy, why India had walked out of RCEP. And I think the same concern vis-a-vis these sectors will hold for the UK-India FTA. The second issue, quickly, I want to talk about investment and ISDS, because I think that's a major interest area for the UK, right? One is they will look for market access. Many of our service sector, including the banking sector and insurance and pension, they are partly open. I mean, FDI is partly open, not fully open. So I think UK will really push hard to get 100% FDI access into these sectors. And that's going to be a major problem. We know, I mean, India was partly, it has been protected from all financial crises, from contagion, because its financial sector has been somewhat protected, but so that could actually be under threat with this FTA. But another big issue is, of course, investor protection. So many of you know of the Kane Energy case, right? So India has a bilateral investment treaty it had with the UK. In fact, this is the first bilateral investment treaty for India, signed in 1994, but this has since been terminated in 2017. And under this bit, Kane Energy, which is a UK company, many of you know, and they have sued India for a kind of retrospective taxation policy. And actually it sued India for it won $1.23 billion US plus costs and interest, right? So that came to 1.7 billion US dollars. India was unable to pay. So Cairn Energy filed lawsuits in 9 countries to seize Indian assets, which is what they can do under the ISDS cases, right? So now they have reached a settlement, but this would mean that India would again be very worried about, and we all are very worried, because we think UK will definitely want to bring back investment, both market access and investor protection under an investment chapter through this FTA. And India has a model bit which gives it some protection, but we do not at all know whether UK will be ready to agree to India's terms. And frankly, India's model bit does not offer adequate protection against such cases. Another quick issue is, I think that, we often say the WTO policy is separate. The governments tend to say that. that FTAs we negotiate like separately, the considerations are different. I think the considerations are very much linked and they are complementary. And frankly, we do not see any support coming from the UK, whether it's on the TRIPS waiver, which I'm sure Gopa will speak about, but also on the issue of agriculture. I mean, India has been fighting to give support to farmers for supporting its public food program. It's called the public stockholding proposal. And we've seen major resistance from all, mainly most developed countries, including EU and UK. And so I think as long as we do not get support from our partners on key multilateral issues being discussed in the WTO, for me, it does not make sense to go to an FTA and give concessions to that country, frankly. So I think this thing needs to be resolved. I mean, we need to see, more or less consistent positions in the WTO for an FTA to work. And finally, secrecy and participation around these FTAs. Many of you know, you are trade activists, how we've been struggling with this. I know on the UK side, I think the government had asked for inputs, even in India, I think, but industry
Rania,
probably,
you have less than a minute.
I'm wrapping up. This is my last point. So in India, the government had asked for inputs. I think the industry gets that information much better. I don't think civil society or farmers groups or dairy groups really got that information. So for us, it has been challenging, and they have not had stakeholder consultation yet on the UK-India FTA, especially amongst these small groups. They may be having consultations with industry, but not with civil society organizations, farmers groups, trade unions, and so on. And India does not have parliamentary ratification, nor do the states, Indian states, have any say in this FTAs. Though many issues, agriculture is a state issue, health is a joint issue. Both state and central government are supposed to formulate policies. So we are very worried that when our process is quite defective, there's no parliamentary oversight, no state government say, then to go ahead with these big deals could be extremely problematic for large sections of the Indian population. Thanks, Ruth.
Leo, over to you.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you so much, Rania. Ruth just having some issues with her internet, so I'm just going to step in. Thank you so much for opening things up for us. I'm going to hand over now to Gareth Thomas Mp, who's been able to join us, which is fantastic. So Gareth is a Labour Shadow Minister for International Trade. He was elected as MP for Harrow West in 1997 and served as a minister in the International Development Department under the previous Labour government. And in his role in the Trade Department, he's been working on issues around transparency and trade policy making, issues around trade union involvement, working on patent rules in relation to COVID as well. So I'm sure Gareth will speak a little bit about some of the work that he's been doing. So without further ado, over to you, Gareth.
I don't know if people, yeah, I hope people can hear me.
We can. Thanks, Gareth.
I'm available to. I think I need Leo, you to let me in terms of the video. But let me just say to the trade justice movement, thanks very much for inviting me to host this conversation today, and absolutely fascinating the part, Ranja, of your contribution that I was able to catch. I had the privilege of going to India many times when I was an international development minister, and saw some of the cooperatives in agriculture that you talked, and obviously saw at firsthand many of the issues around poverty and child labour, for example, which rightly have got the attention of many people here in terms of that we can avoid through an FTA any adverse consequences for the fight against in India. We've had in Parliament, we've had a first debate on what an India free trade agreement might look like. There is some skepticism, I think, as to whether a full FTA will actually be achieved. Both concern at what the British government might be able to deliver, and obviously some sense that there might not be progress on the Indian side either, for a mix of reasons that people will be familiar with. So it'll be interesting to see what progress, if any, is made, and the issues around development, around climate change, around investor protection are particularly pertinent. It seems to me for us to be raising and exploring today, with the second round of negotiations, as I understand it, due to start in early March. So we're at a key point in the conversation. I mean, Labour's position is that we would like to see a free trade agreement happen. Could be in both countries' interest, but we'll monitor very carefully both whether it delivers for Britain and for British businesses, but also crucially whether it helps in the fight against climate change, and in whether it genuinely helps all communities in India be lifted up. Because if it's just a deal that works for the most rich in both our countries, it's certainly not going to be remotely effective in the long term. And maybe that's a segue into our next speaker, Leo, because one of the things that of late that I've been working on is the TRIPS waiver campaign, which India, to its great credit, and South Africa have been leading on at the World Trade Organization, trying to help developing countries get access to the intellectual property that they need in order to manufacture vaccines in their own country. And Gopa, thanks very much for joining today. I know that you're a lawyer based in Delhi with particular expertise in patent issues, and that you've been doing a lot of work on intellectual property and big pharmaceutical companies, and it will be great to hear your presentation too.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Gareth Thomas. Let me just try to share the screen if possible. Thank you once again for organizing this online meeting, so we can discuss some of the concerns related to UK-India FTAs. So I'll be very brief, and I'll be focusing on the implications of UK FTA on access to medicines. So there's a three bullet points which I have taken from the UK strategic paper on UK-India FTA. So the first one talks about that one of the objectives in the these are basically bullet points are related to the intellectual property section of the proposed FTA. So one of the objectives is to secure patent protection which achieve an effective balance between rewarding research and innovation, while reflecting wider public interests such as ensuring access to medicine. And similarly, it's also reaffirm UK's commitment to Doha Declaration. At the same time, it says the agreement, the outcome of the FTA should be consistent with UK's existing international obligations, including European Patent Convention, to which UK is a party. So from the first two bullet points, you don't feel really anything so much problematic, but when you look at read with the middle one, that's the UK's existing commitments and the especially the European Patent Convention. So that is the sort of a point of worry. I'll come to that in a short while. So we need to understand that the Indian industry, as well as the UK's pharmaceutical industry, UK is at least having two big firms which are having capacity to introduce new medicines and vaccines. So therefore, whenever UK enter into an agreement with India, and which includes intellectual property rights, naturally it is to there is an effort to advance the intellectual property protection interest, especially the patent protection of pharmaceuticals, to the interest of these two innovative firms. But on the other hand, India is having an industry which is of generic industry. India ranks around 14th in terms of value of production of pharmaceuticals and 3rd in terms of volume. But while we say this Indian pharmaceutical industry ranks 14th in value, but we need to understand that exactly in on a scale of global pharmaceutical industry, Indian pharmaceutical industry currently values somewhere around 41 to 42 billion dollars. But this 42 billion, if you add up the 2021 list of top selling medicines, if you add the first 4 top brand, that is around 46.5 billion. So Indian pharmaceutical industry, though it ranks 14th in terms of value, but it is less than the value of top selling 4 brands. So this gives you an idea. But at the same time, in terms of volume, it ranks around 3. That means many developing countries are depending upon, not only developing countries, even developed countries are depending upon the export from India. But in terms of intellectual property rights, what we need to understand that in terms of the exports to developed countries, this agreement will not have any implications precisely because this is a generic market. Indian companies, the top Indian companies, exports to US and Europe and Europe, mainly not mainly, it's all off patented medicines, but they do export to other developing countries which are of patent protected in developed countries, but may not have patent protection in developing countries. So one of the most important implications of this agreement could be the Section 3D of the Indian Patent Act. There could be many more implications on related to enforcement of patents, enforcement or the way in which the procedure for granting patents, etc. So I'm not getting into that details, but I'm just focusing only one point. Here it says that UK would, this agreement needs to be remain consistent with UK's existing international obligations, including European Patent Convention. So the European Patent Office grants patents on new uses of patents. That means even a molecule which is known earlier, maybe known in 30 years, but if you can find a new use, that patent is granted. And Europe also grants a lot of evergreening patents, or multiple patents on a similar drug. That is order of the day in under the European Patent Convention, as well as in UK's Patent Office practices are concerned. But Indian Patents Act has a specific provision. There are 3-4 provisions which checks the practice of evergreening. That means the obtaining of multiple patents on a single medicine or single molecule is checked through 2-3 provisions, but most important provision is Section 3D of the Patents Act, which basically rejects any patent application claiming new uses of patents or any new form of non-substance are claimed. These patents have been are supposed to be rejected. But when it comes to new form of non-substance, then it is not outrightly rejected, but the patent applicant has a burden to prove the efficacy of their of that particular new form of the non-substance over the what is there in the public domain already. Further, it gives an explanation which says that salt, ethers, polymorphs, and all those things will be treated as a part of non-substance. And the only way to obtain a patent on a non-substance is to prove the efficacy. They are substantially different, significantly different in properties with regard to efficacy. So there is a burden to provide evidence to show that the current patent is a superior in terms of efficacy compared to what is there in the public domain. So this law has been challenged in court, and which has been affirmed by the court. So this is the law. If India enters into an FTA negotiation, we're having a patent, having a chapter on intellectual property, including patents, then this provision might be under threat. So this, if this provision goes off, because UK cannot enter into an agreement, without compromising its existing international obligations, and it's a well-known fact that European Patent Office grants such patents. So what would be the implications for healthcare? One is that if you allow evergreening of patents, there will be multiple patents on the same medicine. That means extension of the patent monopoly beyond the expiry of the original patents. That means beyond 20 years. That will in turn will enhance the monopoly in the pharmaceutical market and resulting in high prices. So that high prices is going to compromise availability of affordable medicines within and outside India. Of course, India, we need to understand that there is a nearly 70 to 71% of the health expenditure is out-of-pocket expenditure. Every year, around somewhere between 55 to 58 million people are pushed below poverty line because there was an incident, or there is an incident of hospitalization among the family members. So this is the situation in India, and we also need to understand that in the absence of a very robust public health system, that means the people are depending upon heavily on hospitals and medicines to meet their healthcare needs. Unlike there is a kind of a preventive approach which is existing in many developed countries. So the medicines plays a very crucial role to provide healthcare in countries like India, where people are spending out-of-pocket expenditure to meet their healthcare needs. If the prices goes up, that will affect not only the availability of affordable medicines, but also the healthcare, access of healthcare. So this is a very, very problematic situation, and it also affects the availability of affordable access of many new medicines in other developing countries. So this proposed approach, that is the inclusion of patents in the FTA, is a problematic approach. They should keep away from that. But this is, I'm saying, without prejudice to the idea of very FTA itself, because currently the FTAs are in a way is a race to bottom approach. With that kind of approach, which has huge implications on even to achieve sustainable development goals and many other development objectives, which countries always tries to uphold through various international forums and instruments. So therefore, without prejudice to the very idea of UK-India FTA, the critical approach to the UK-India FTA, I'm saying that at least they should keep away patents from the FTAs, the scope of FTAs. Thank you.
Oh, sorry, Gareth. You're still on mute there.
Sorry, but it's a simple mistake to regularly make. Gopa, thanks very much for your presentation, and in particular, thanks very much for what was a very helpful and very easy to access trip around the key patent issues that are potentially at stake. And I think your message at the end came across loud and clear about, in your view, the need to stay away from patent issues in any comprehensive FTA discussions if India isn't to be adversely affected. Gopa, thanks again for that, and people I'm sure will have questions for you. Brings me to the last of our panelists, Parminder Jeet Singh, who's the Executive Director at IT for Change, and is a key thinker and contributor to the debate about internet governance, and has contributed already substantial pieces on how you can deliver a rights-centered approach to the internet and digital provision. Parminder, you're very welcome, and we're looking forward to listen to your contribution.
Thank you so much, Mr. Thomas, and thanks to the Trade Justice Movement for inviting us for this interaction. As probably it would have been figured out from my introduction, I will be talking about the digital trade part of a possible trade deal between India and UK. Earlier, it was said that UK has said that we will probably avoid the more sensitive issues, and Ranja talked about agriculture being sensitive, so whether they're going to put that aside. And I definitely know that for India, digital trade is extremely sensitive, and they have been fighting, struggling as well at the W to keep digital trade right now outside any kind of discussions. And to any claim that free trade agreements, bilateral ones, are quite different from WTO, which is more architectural agreements. The problem with digital trade or the digital economy is that most of its elements are structural. And if you enter into some kind of structural relationships via a bilateral treaty in with one country, you more or less commit to it for most other countries. And India, I am not able to see how it would get into any kind of template with UK, because then it would be forced to agree to similar things with other countries and at the WTO. So I'm finding it very difficult that India is going to go ahead with a digital trade agreement, even bilaterally with the UK. So let me look at 2 or 3 important areas. One area where there may be convergence among thinkers from both sides on the possible business opportunities in a trade deal is a fact that India and UK are right up there in the global pyramid or indices of a startup ecology. Actually, just last month, India went ahead of UK in terms of taking the number 3 position after US and China in terms of its strength of its startup ecology. UK was 3rd, but India has just now come 3rd, which means more or less that they're quite close to one another. So there's a lot of startups both in India and UK. And there may be a thinking that is there something which can be done around helping these startups? So I think I should first address this issue before I go to the other problem areas. We need to recognize that both Indian and US startups are largely technology providers. At best, software as a service providers, but generally small AI startups, etc. They either just provide certain new technologies which are used by other businesses, or at best, even if they are promising startups of a direct consumer facing service, they are largely sooner or later gobbled up by a Google or an Amazon or a Microsoft. And the fact is, many of these startups already have that plan to be bought out. So you have a very different kind of startup ecology you're talking about. Either, as I repeat, they're technology providers of small kinds to proper platform businesses, or they are waiting to be bought out by platforms. The difference here is that neither UK or India has any large platform company. And it is these platform companies who are going to dominate the world, and all of them, almost all of them, are in the US or in China. There is a recent UNCTAD report which says that 90% of capitalization of top 75 platforms globally is in either China or the US. So you are more or less completely excluded. So to get excited about tech startups is something we have to think about. They are one kind of digital economy, and they're largely not helped by the typical trade rules. And I do not have time to go into it in depth, but just to determine that the segment of startups which India and UK have are very different, and we do not have platform companies, and that platform companies are the real deal. And both of us are in actually a position where we have to resist being pulled into those large global corporations, which increasingly not only dominate, but control all sectors, whether it's Amazon controlling e-commerce and killing, for example, also the US, UK supermarkets, or it is an Uber, or those large platform companies which control different sectors. So both US, UK, and India are to be careful that they do not get co-opted into these large global platforms, and therefore have to be a little conservative to figure out how, to the extent possible, they can organize their own digital economies, keeping most of the data and digital intelligence or artificial intelligence value at home. So this is the similarity, not the similarity which India and UK may jump up to as an opportunity, both being number 3 and number 4 in the startup ecology. So I would put this issue aside and now come to a country like India, which sometimes gets too fond of the fact that India has a huge number of unicorns and startups. So we need to recognize that what these emerging platforms, even if they are platform companies in India, what they are doing is organizing the informal sector and often decimating it, and making formal companies which attract a lot of, therefore, capital around it. And just getting excited because there are a lot of visible unicorns getting a lot of capital attracted around it, venture or even IPOs later on, is something taking off your eyes from the fact that a lot of traders are losing their shops, a lot of farmers may be losing their livelihood, a lot of small service providers are becoming like employees of these big corporations. So there's just an internal reorganization taking place where the value is taken away from decentralized peripheries into some unicorns. So you do not get overexcited about it. We need to still figure out rules of fair play in these platform ecosystems, whereby the platforms who control the central intelligence of an ecosystem. I'll come to this relationship between data, but they're taking data from all the players inside a sector, converting into intelligence and using that intelligence then to control the activities of all players. That's a typical example of what Uber does with drivers and commuters. And you have to just cut paste this particular thing on all other sectors, and you get what an intelligence corporation is and what an intelligence economy is, which basically is digital economy. So basically, I'm just saying that we have not figured it out at all. And when we have not figured things out, we need to be very conservative in making international commitments, which do not then allow us to do the kind of domestic regulation which is necessary for domestic economic strength, but also many social, cultural, and sometimes even political purposes, the role, for example, what social media plays in current politics. So now going to the typical templates of trade deals, 3-4 issues are central. One is data flows, other is local presence, and third is access to the source code. There are others like equal treatment for foreign players and access to networks, but I'll just talk about these 3. Now, in all 3, if we allow the kind of policies which US and now even China wants, which is like free access to your data without any economic rights of data producers inside your economy, or no requirement for local presence for global corporations, which therefore cannot be regulated, which is essential. Increasingly, we are finding that big tech has to be regulated not only from an economic point of view, but also social, cultural, and sometimes political points of view. And third is access to code. Actually, a lot of laws are today being written that AI algorithms can't do this, can't do that. Last month, China came up with actually a good AI regulation policy, but Europe itself has an AI regulation framework which talks about 3 kinds of AIs requiring different kind of precautions, but all of them need some kind of access to the source code. All these 3 things are going to be made difficult by any kind of trade deal, if I go by the template trade deals. So the question, therefore, is that, therefore, rather than going into a binding trade deal, Indian and UK businesses should look at cooperative agreements, how they can do business together, what facilities can be provided so that there is least obstruction for doing business together. But these should be done in some kind of cooperation frameworks, but not binding trade deals. And I'll stop here and probably say a few more things if there are questions relevant to that. Thank you so much, Mr. Thomas.
Parminder, thanks very much for your presentation. Very interesting on some of the digital challenges that there would be in particular for India, and to sum up your view is that rather than having a digital chapter in the agreement, it would be better if there was more encouragement for business to business discussions about how to increase, if you like, digital partnerships between individual companies rather than between our 2 nations in that sense. Thank you very much for that. I want to open it up to questions now to Gopa, to Ranja, and Parminder. So do please put your questions in the Q&A, and very happy to get them out. You've got a number of questions already. So Ranja, if I may, I might come to you first. The first question from ICC Events is, how encouraged should they be by India's stance on ISDS that it won't be included, and should there be encouragement that both Australia and New Zealand appear to have been successful in keeping ISDS out of the FTA deals that they've done? That's from ICC Events. So it'd be interesting to hear a view from our panelists on that. Ranja, yeah.
Thanks for that question. I think there will be huge pressure, especially from the UK side, to include ISDS in this agreement. I mean, because that's the way they feel that, you know, British investors could be protected in India. And if you look at India's model bit, it actually doesn't say no to ISDS per se. It just puts safeguards, like, for example, legislative decisions or judicial decisions will not come under the purview of the BIT or the dispute settlement, the purview of the dispute settlement mechanism, or, for example, decisions by the state policy may not come under it, and so on. So it has tried to put some safeguards, but it hasn't taken an outright stand against ISDS, at least in its model bit. So, I mean, I think in spite of what governments say now, I would be actually very skeptical if ISDS could be kept out. I mean, I think there would be definitely huge pressure from the UK side on India to include ISDS, I think, in this agreement. And investment, because investment will feature very strongly. And of course, they will have to discuss they will probably discuss, try to put in a strong protection framework. And therefore, I mean, I would be skeptical about keeping ISDS out, finally.
Ranja, thanks very much. Parminder or Gopa, do you have a view? Is Ranja wrong, or is she even more right than she realizes?
So I just would like to add one more point. There is already India signed the first bilateral investment India signed in 1995 is with the UK. But in the last 2 years ago, India pulled out from around 58 bilateral investment treaties. I don't know whether India pulled out from UK-India bilateral investment treaty. If that is still in force, then that is already having an ISDS provision, ISDS provision already existing between UK and India. Yeah.
No, it was terminated in 2017. So
yeah,
I
but
think
still
they
in
will
force
definitely
for the
want to
15
put
more.
something
Yeah,
back
for the all the existing investment
based on that framework,
yeah,
right?
Yeah, I'm saying that still the 2017, if India pull back, that means all the existing investment is still protected till for more than 15 years. So only 2032, there won't be the protection. ISDS ends. But of course, all the new investment started from 2017, there is no protection. So that's the legal status as of now.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks,
Goma. Parminder, do you have a view?
No, thanks so much. I agree with Ranja and Gopa.
Okay. Well, our next question is from Josie Cohen, and it relates to pesticides and what role the speakers expect pesticides to play in the FDA negotiations. And Ranja, that feels like a question that might be right up your street, so to speak.
Sorry, yeah, let me unmute myself. I think what I'm not fully sure about it, but I think what India is expecting, as I said, is some easing of the non-tariff measures on agricultural products, right? So agricultural and manufactured products, and this seems to be a major interest area. India at least has put it down officially as a major area of interest, that to kind of target and get them to get the UK to ease these standards. And it has actually wants EU's limits on the trace amounts of pesticides in food products and its restrictions on hormone disrupting chemicals. And I think the REACH regulations, etc., to be eased. Now, whether they can actually achieve this, whether UK will agree to this, I would actually doubt very much. But India would definitely want these standards eased, because otherwise India's exports of food products and also some manufacturing products are in deep trouble. They really cannot gain even if they have an FTA in place.
Gopa, your hand was up briefly.
There might be intellectual property related provisions, like all the patents, which I mentioned to you already, the new uses and different forms of a non-chemical entity. So where the pesticides will get benefited out of that, if that provision is there in the FTA. And similarly, I think the pesticide industry also will push for a test data protection. That means the trials run for the marketing approval of the pesticides will be protected as a trade secret by the regulatory authorities. As a result, the copying of that by the generic pesticide manufacturers will be difficult. So these are the two intellectual property protection pesticide industry also will push along with the pharmaceutical industry.
Gopa, thanks very much. Parminder, if you don't mind, I won't come to you on that one. Kival asks, how important is UK-India geopolitics and geopolitical interests in any potential trade deal? Parminder, do you want to sort of kick off on that one?
Oh, well, yes, in general, of course, India is causing up more to the Western camp led by the US, and UK is a close partner of the US. And additionally, coming to the digital side, which I have some expertise in, there is also what is being splitting of the internet or splitting of the digital space, increasingly in a very unfortunate manner. There are many initiatives now where there is a China-controlled sphere of influence in the digital side, including standards and infrastructure provision, and also platform companies. And then there is this US side of it, which is a very unfortunate thing. I think if India has to be balancing its interests, I prefer a digital non-alignment in this regard. But yes, there is certain closeness of interest with the so-called US group, if the UK doesn't take offense to be described in that manner. But so that kind of geopolitics of the splitting of the internet or the digital space, and India having to figure out which side it wants to be more closely aligned with, does weigh a little upon this particular matter we are discussing today.
Thanks, Parminder. Gopa and Ranja.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you once again giving this opportunity. I would say that India, with its liberal and democratic tradition, this more aligned with the there is a convergence of interests between UK and India. But at the same time, this kind so there is a lot of scope for partnership, but it cannot grow beyond a point. There is no space for India to develop, right? If the what I'm saying is that what happened in Europe after the Second World War, Western Europe, there was a New Deal. What happened with Japan and South Korea? Okay, so they would be able to economically develop, and those kind of policy space were given to them. But now, that, while there is a convergence of interests between India and UK, and there is a scope for strengthening partnership, especially in the current world order, there is a need for reinforce the democratic countries to come together. But it cannot progress if there is no scope for, there is no space for economic development. India, with its 1 billion plus population, and majority of substantial percentage of this population is below poverty line or on a subsistence level. So any government of the day, whatever may be whatever may be its commitment to democracy, cannot take that partnership to its logical conclusion without addressing the development concerns. Okay, so therefore, I think we need to look at something what happened in the past in Western Europe, or even with the South Korea or Japan. So there is a need for giving a policy space to address the development concerns of the people. I'm not saying that you given to make India economically superpower, but there is an urgent need to lift the population, substantial population, for above the poverty line, and there is a decent job, decent work, and a decent social security. The current paradigm of FTAs actually raised to bottom. So what's going to happen if there is a tariff reduction on, of course, on apparels? Then basically you have to compete with Bangladesh or other countries. So the immediate victim of that is the labor rights. In India and other developing countries are supposed to export the labor-intensive products. So you cut the cost of labor by removing the social security, by reducing the wages. So this will have implications. So instead of acting as an instrument or facilitating development, these instruments are actually signing away the future of the population, or as a, I'm not using the word as a nation, but this kind of agreements takes away the future of not only the young generation, also the future generation. So then the democratic alliance may not be held together and may not progress further. So we can, though there is a convergence of those interests, but it is not going to its logical conclusion. So that's the point I would like to flag here. Thank you.
Gopa, thanks very much. Ranja?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with both of them. And I think we know India, I mean, because of also its political conflicts with China, but it's moving towards the developed countries as both economic and political partners. But I think giving up policy space and kind of binding your hands in terms of your policy flexibility is not a good idea. India is not there at the moment. As Gopa said, there's huge poverty and inequality. So in some sense, when India is looked at as this giant developing economy, which is doing very well, and it is also like, it also negotiates pretty well. I mean, I know Indian negotiators kind of negotiate more, like they defend their kind of rights or policy space more than many other smaller or LDCs are able to do. But even then, India has huge inequality inside, and it's neither its agriculture nor its industry nor the services sector, frankly, are in a position where it can give up full policy flexibility. So it's absolutely, I mean, in terms of trade and economic cooperation, cooperation on technology, relationship with the UK is very much welcome. But I think an FTA ties up the hands, right? Like, because you are really making deep commitments, very long-term commitments, and commitments which are linked to each other across these chapters, very, very complex arrangements. And that I don't think India is ready to do with developed countries at the moment.
Well, we are running out of time, so I've got time for one last question. And what I thought I might do, just to make the three of you, our three speakers, work a little bit harder, is give you three questions to answer in hopefully a relatively bite-sized bits. So from Rachel Noble from ActionAid, what are some of the possible implications for public service provision and access India under an FTA? She's thinking particularly of health, education, water, and sanitation, and in the context particularly of women's rights and gender equality. Laurie Bohe asks about could the panel just flag the risks, if you see any, for the deal for micro, small, and medium enterprises across other sectors for high employment sectors for low income groups. And then from War on Want, from Lewis Sullivan, to what extent, Parminder, is your position on digital trade provisions pushed by the US and China? Your points about data flows, to what extent are those concerns shared by the Indian government, do you think? My apologies to those who've typed in further questions, but those are the last three. And Ranja, if you wouldn't mind doing your best to answer all three in a relatively brief answer, that would be great.
Yeah, I just try to. I mean, I'm also looking at the questions and just quickly try to answer what you raised, Mr. Thomas. So Elizabeth's question, yes, on agriculture and textiles and garments. India, as you know, is already exporting quite a lot to the UK, and it would like to. But I think India has been thrown out of the GSP preferences list of UK, the new list that UK came out with, and India doesn't really get. So India will be very keen to protect and increase its market in textiles and garments. But all of this will depend also on I think, the non-tariff measures, which India is trying to get it addressed in the FTA. I would be very, very skeptical that India will get anything. But if it did, you are right that especially for textiles and garments, we know many of India's neighbors in Asia, Bangladesh, Cambodia, Sri Lanka, many other countries also produce. And I'm sure they would also be watching this FTA with interest, because it could mean trade diversion from their economies. And one is, of course, Rachel, yes, public services, we do expect, because we know UK has major interest in all these service areas, right? So we would be watching it closely. We are already raising this issue of how public services in India needs to actually expand and not get constrained. And what we have seen so far is, foreign services, when they come, in fact, I think Gopa has a very good paper on this, how, foreign hospitals, foreign health facilities, banks, and all these services, they tend to focus in the urban areas. But at the same time, they are weakening our public services, and the public provision of these services get crowded out. So they are not able to even service the rural areas, because normally they do a cross subsidizing, right? Governments would like make a bit more profit in the urban areas, so they are able to then support these services in the rural areas. So we see when they get kicked out of the urban areas because of these very profit driven and private services, foreign, coming from say UK or other developed countries, they would definitely not only have the impact of raising costs in urban areas, they would actually kick out government services even from rural areas. On MSME, yes, there would be a worry, though our industry bodies seem to think that they worry only about China and they don't seem to worry so much about developed countries. But we have discussed this, that MSMEs would have a lot to worry about. And I think the government procurement chapter there is one we need to watch, because I mean, India gives a lot of concession and market preference to MSMEs through its, public procurement purchases, like many developing countries do. They use it as a development tool. And we've seen this was a major challenge in the EU-India FTA. And I know UK has government procurement liberalization on its list. So it will ask for liberalization. And I think MSMEs will be, we should be very worried also about losing that market preference in the Indian market. I hope I have kind of covered everything meant for me. Thanks a lot.
Ranja, thanks very much. Gopal, let me come to you. Gopal, you're on mute.
No, I don't have. I don't. Yeah. I don't have any add further on this. Only on that Bangladesh, there is a question below that. I think it's already answered that, when it can even, adversely impact Indian labor's wages rather than the Bangladesh labor charges. So that may also if India is cut it, then Bangladesh may cut it further. But I think immediate victim will be the wages and labor conditions.
That's very helpful. And Parminder, we've saved you to last. Any take on those three questions?
Thank you. Again, I will give the take from the digital trade side. Rachel, it is actually true that public services, especially in the sectors you mentioned, health, education, sanitation, etc., also agriculture, are under strain because of privatization and digitalization, and large platform companies are pushing privatization, and often these large companies in these sectors become competitors of and push away public service things. And Government of India is trying in these sectors to develop a balanced digitalization with public sector protocols and platform at the core. And this is possible to do with a very constrained or controlled digital development, which will not happen if we start to sign the global template, which I'm more afraid that if India signs with UK, they actually start signing the global template which China and US wants. And that pushes down a kind of digitalization which public services has to take place, which will protect them. And therefore, they are threatened with this kind of digitalization, which are pushed with the kind of models we have been talking about. Laurie's question very quickly, yes, the medium and small enterprises are affected because, as I was saying, this large platform companies' basic model is to organize the informal sector and take away most of the value through what they actually call as data-based intelligence. And therefore, we have to develop platform regulations which manage the rules of the game, how these small players gets organized. But that power to develop platform rules and management and regulation is highly constrained if these big corporations come and overawe the whole digital economy, which is the whole game of the US and China one. And the last point, yes, Indian government's current position is entirely what more or less I have been saying. They are against any kind of these things, data flow, access to source code, local presence, any of these typical US template of digital trade. They are against almost all of its provisions. And that's where they are. And I'm only afraid that because they share a similar look at the startup ecology, India and UK, they may not take the wrong lens, which I described in the start, that these startups are technology providers and they are not the real platform companies where the whole power lies and the whole danger lies. So these are my fears, and thank you so much.
Ranja, Gopa, Parminder, just on behalf of the trade justice movement and all those who've joined our conversation today, thanks very much for your really rich initial presentations and the really interesting answers to the provocative questions that participants have tabled. If I can abuse my position as chair and just ask the three of you if there are summaries of what you've said available, it will be very interesting, I'm sure, certainly for me and I suspect for other participants to be able to have them to refer back to them in future conversations that inevitably are going to happen about the India-UK FTA talks. So if you do have anything like that, perhaps you could get them to Leo Verity at the Trade Justice Movement. And Leo, if you'll forgive me, given the quality of some of the organisations that are represented on the call, they will no doubt have views that perhaps have shaped TJM's views. But if they want to send in comments to Ruth Cadbury, who's also been on the call, and I, to help influence a bit of our thinking about the coming talks, perhaps people would send them, Leo, their ideas and thoughts to you, and you can perhaps pass them on to us. But for now, I think that my last duty is to thank Ranja, Gopa, and Parminder once again for joining the Trade Justice Movement call today. We really appreciate your time. It's been a really rich hour and a bit, and certainly given me lots to think about. Thanks very much again, and please enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, everybody. And just one final word. Thank you so much to the panelists from TJM and to you, Gareth, as well, for chairing that so brilliantly. We really appreciate it. Looking forward to working with all of you as the negotiations progress.